2, 1.
All today, I need the coastal commission meeting in order.
Oh, thank you. So Francesca, you want to do the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Castagna,
Here.
Commissioner Evans,
Here.
Commissioner Kinsey, Commissioner O'Neill,
Here.
Commissioner Sovereign,
Here.
and Commissioner Thomas,
Here.
Commissioner Witowski.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Sovereign. I got it.
So let's see, consent of agenda. So approval of the minutes.
I read them. They look good. I recommend approval.
A second,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. So now it's time for general public comments. And I think we have someone here.
Oh, all right.
All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who might not know who I am, my name is Peter Hiller. I'm here really as a citizen of Monterey County. I actually live in Carmel, but I spent a lot of time in Monterey. So call me an honorary citizen of Monterey. Francisca has passed around a note that I sent in electronically the other day, but in case you didn't see it, this printed version comes with a special edition on the back of it. And if there's enough for Mr. Edwards and Mr. Copeland, we'll keep passing them. I hope there are. Many years ago, Eldon Dedini did a series of drawings for me for a school project. And I thought the one of Colton Hall was particularly appropriate. So I included a copy of that on the back. And I also recently came into possession of a letterpress engraving of Colton Hall that's really quite striking, so to speak. And I would like to gift this to whoever appropriate person or venue would be. I don't know if anybody does any letterpress printing anymore, but it is a beautiful piece and it's very nicely done on copper. And so this is a gift to the appropriate person, whoever wants to accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Peter, who is the artist for that?
Well, I think their artist name, I think actually is on it at the bottom, but I could not read it in reverse. And it's very small, but. So what prompts me to be here is having read in the last recent months about some new property acquisitions and also some discussions about what used to be the island of adobes. And I will quote Rodney Smith, or well, I'm here with the thought in mind of can't we all get along? And so I'm going to really just ask a question, and that is it of interest for the numerous nonprofit organizations that focus on art and history of Monterey to be working together for mutual benefit? And if so, how can that collaboration be established? And I have a sense that there's some adversity amongst some of the organizations, and I find that sad. Whereas I think everybody's overall goals and intent are very similar. And so I'm just throwing this out as an idea. I know you're working on the reestablishing and refining the path of history. That's the perfect message, I think, for the entire community to be working on that. And when I say community, I mean downtown Monterey, to expand it and to be more inclusive than it already is. And my hope would be that the island of the adobes concept, which I realize is a historic idea, and has sort of fallen by the wayside, but is now maybe being revisioned. And in its being revisioned, I would hope that it expands, from the water all the way up to this property up here, and not be reestablished as any small part of what it could be. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Oh, Peter.
Yes.
So I have one question and one comment. What recent acquisitions are you referring to?
The property across the street, that I believe one building is being purchased by the Art Museum. And the other is, City of Monterey property, and they're revisioning the rumor, I'm gonna call it a rumor because I haven't sat in on any conversations about it, but that one of the buildings across the street is going to be repurposed for to potentially become offices for the art museum. And then the other is going to be a new gallery display area that I think is under the auspices more of the city. But they're with that conversation, and this was in the Herald, I think, this all first came to my attention. But that's a little kernel, I guess, of change that I've read about.
And my comment is that some time ago, we used to have quarterly meetings under Brian's predecessor of the state parks, the city of Monterey, and Monterey History and Art, just to share resources, to discuss items. I think we did that for like 5 or 6 years, and then it sort of dissipated and went away.
Mhm.
Because I can't recall us doing that recently at all.
Well,
You
and
make a very good point.
all three of those organizations are on my list that,
Yeah.
I just brainstormed as to kind of Monterey-centric groups that have an interest in the arts and history. And I'm not sure that it wouldn't be a good idea to revisit that and to see if everybody's, I guess you have to ascertain if there's interest and, to maybe reestablish that kind of conversation. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are involved with the roundtable group, and they have over 100 people and almost as many organizations represented, and that's for the whole county. But that's a prototype maybe of what happens. They meet once a month. It's just sharing information, it's conversations. It's really, I find it to be, a very worthwhile 2 hours, out of the month. And again, so that's maybe an example of what could happen if there's an interest. And I'm not sure who would spearhead it, but it seemed like your commission was probably in the nicest leadership role or position to take something on like that if there's interest.
And the project that Bill mentioned, that I was part of that pretty heavily when they first established that, and I believe in 1999 or 2000, when the city and History and Art and state parks all kind of worked together. And there was actually Monterey History and Art was a fiscal organization. The idea is we share resources and all that kind of thing, but also work with everybody else around Monterey. But yeah, it did kind of fall apart after, but it was very well established initially, and there was a lot of response to it. Dennis was involved in that as well. So in that whole project.
I just throw out an idea. It might be good for us to host quarterly, probably is too much, but maybe a semi-annual meeting and just have these groups come and exchange ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter brings out the Museum of Art, which is doing a lot. I mean, the fact that they're committed to this building, not La Mirada, the fact that they bought the attorney's building, that might wind up with, what happens to the state building next to it, the old Sancho Panza. And with the library here and Colton Hall here and Casa Serrano not too far, we got a good nucleus of museums right in this area.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an excellent idea that maybe we should do that.
And can I just add that we can't have too long of a discussion on this if this is not an agendized item. But just to point out, Peter, to your point, the one building that is on there that was sold was bought by Monterey Museum of Art. The building next door is not by the city, that is the state parks.
Oh.
So the one that is State Parks is looking at a grant for operating a art gallery in that space.
Okay.
Gutierrez, Adobe.
The Gutierrez Adobe,
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
Okay.
And
Thank
so
you.
and then the Monterey Museum of Art is city property. It's a city building that the Monterey Museum of Art leases, and Elkins Park is a shared park between the city and Monterey Museum of Art right there. But if we want to put on something, I think having some kind of discussion or having something in a future agenda item would be good for this.
I would like to make a motion to that effect that we agendize this for a future discussion.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right. It passed.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Peter.
Thank you.
We'll be sure to invite Peter to that meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Anybody else there on Zoom?
We do want to let any viewers know that information on participating in today's meeting and providing public comment, including remotely by Zoom or telephone, is on this meeting's agenda, which is online at isearchmonterey.org. At this time, there are no public comments. Chair Thomas.
All right, thank you. So then we'll move on to receive update of expanded path of history.
Thank you, Chair Thomas. Let me do this. Trying to open up my Zoom again. Sorry. We just need to update sharing. So as a update, we had our subcommittee met recently, discussed this briefly when we met over there at Ricketts Lab to look at some other things on there as well as on the Bruce Harris Way. But the path of history, we completed the work with the consultant. And after we completed the work with the consultant with Page and Turnbull, I asked Dennis Copeland, our Museum and Cultural Arts Manager, who's been retired and come back to work with us in the library and special projects. We appreciate Dennis's knowledge and everything, the skills that he brings with us. So I asked Dennis to take a look at this also to update the report. And with that report, I believe I shared that with the committee at one point by email of the subcommittee on there. Hopefully all of you received it because it's a pretty large file, over 20 megabytes, but I could share that if those allow me to share the screen on this. With that, the report highlights a number of sites on the current, like on the existing path, as well as the two specific additional paths that are there. And I think, let me see if I can open this up. So it's a fairly large report in terms of the number of sites that we look at on here. And Dennis, anything do you want me to do you think your thoughts for highlighting? Should we just highlight the existing path and some of the sites that were added on there?
Yeah, I think the proposed paths.
Yeah.
As well as the original path.
Let me see if I can move this. It'll make it easier for me to scroll through it here as well. So with the ad hoc subcommittee, we talked about bringing this to the Historic Preservation Commission. Their last couple meetings have been canceled or postponed, so haven't been able to put it on their agenda. So the hope is to bring it forward for them to just give review and just discuss it with them. But we haven't been able to get on their calendar as of yet. The full report we can have shared with everybody as well, but this goes over the initial walking path, some of the ancillary walking tours. These are other walking tours in the area, and talking about Explore Monterey. That goes to Peter's comment where we actually had a website in the past called historicmonterey.org. That website domain is no longer active. And that was the tie-in of a lot of the other agencies that are out there. And so that was part of the Preserve America grant as well. That it was at one point, Preserve America was Community Foundation of Monterey County, Preserve America, which was a national grant. And then you had different agencies involved with that, Monterey History and Art Association. And we all work together, but that has kind of fallen by the wayside, it seems like. So just scrolling through, sorry for scrolling through so fast. These are additional sites to talk about to add. These were proposed for the existing path, like on the current path, not the two additional paths. One is the Jules Simino House on Van Buren Street. And then we looked at the Miller Adobe on Cayuga, the Few House on Van Buren Street, the Ordway Block Building. We have Freeman's Mortuary, Monterey County Bank, which right now the Wells Fargo Bank on Alvarado Street, Bergschecker House, or did I pronounce that? Yeah. First Presbyterian Church, the Carnegie Library, which is now operated by Middlebury, Roderick House on West Franklin Street, Monterey Firehouse on Cayuga, Hank Ketchum Studio, which is Pierce Street just down the road over there by Colton Hall, and Christian Science Reading Room on Pearl Street. There's a Sherman Rose Inn, the J.C. Anthony Building, the professional building here on Franklin and KAP, Mary Corning Winslow Black Studio House, the Monterey Post Office. And so those are some of the sites that we can, if we want to go back and look at any of those, but those were on a prior subcommittee in the work. So a lot of those were identified, I believe, in 2019, I believe that was.
Yes.
There was a
2019.
2018, 2019. There was, that was when there was a draft committee report about identifying sites. So a lot of those sites that were in that draft report from before that was done by staff and Museums Commission have been included in there. So that's from the existing path of history. So those would be technically added to on there. Any questions or feedback on those as of yet? So if not, there's the two new cultural history walks. One is on the Pearl District there in Monterey, and the other one is in New Monterey District. And so the Pearl District is, you'll see here, it says, I'll read this part off, so if people can't read it. Monterey's historic Pearl District is generally bounded on the north by Del Monte Avenue, on the east by Camino El Estero, and south by Webster Street, and on the west by Figueroa Street. Originally the eastern outskirts of early 20th century Monterey, this area initially developed as a mixed-use center for various immigrant communities, particularly Japanese, Chinese, and Sicilian fishermen. The historic intersection at Washington and East Franklin Streets to the west of the Pearl District was the epicenter of the late 1800s and early 1900s Japanese and Chinese businesses outside of the fishing industry, as seen in the 1905 and 1912 Sanborn maps. This grouping of immigrant-owned businesses likely perpetuated the physical expansion of the Pearl District, as well as ethnic and cultural acceptance within downtown Monterey. This mixed-use neighborhood was conveniently located between the fishing operations at Fisherman's Wharf and later Cannery Row to its northwest, and the service-oriented positions at the Hotel Del Monte to the east, both major employers of immigrant labor during the early 20th century. So this is, these are the sites that we did the walks on and got feedback from commissioners, and later identified because there were items that were initially misidentified or sites mislabeled during the original report, and have gone back and been edited. But there's a number of the maps in terms of here, and a general, some of the areas that were located in terms of Jack's Park there down in the center as well. So there's a brief kind of list of sites in here. The one is the intersection of East Franklin and Washington. This is, there's not a specific building still right there. So this is just kind of starting point. We have the Japanese American Citizens League Hall at Adams Street. Jack's Park there on Adams. The Watanabe House on Pearl. Sunrise Market on Pearl Street, the World War II USO building, Royal Presidio Chapel, Marsh's Oriental Art Store, and Lake El Estero, and the El Estero Presbyterian Church, the African American USO building, and the First French Consulate building, and then the Pizza Net Storage. So some of these you'll notice are like, for example, the first French consulate building is technically on the path of history, and you'll see a marker out in front, but you won't see the physical markers on there because it was over time removed from the kind of the walking path, but it is part of the official path of history currently. So some of these are in the Royal Presidio are currently on this, but this path incorporates some of those for people to kind of start and walk from existing points to do another kind of unique walk. Any thoughts or comments or questions?
I have just one comment. I think
Yeah.
that can be helpful if we design brochures and whatnot. So we just received a JCL collection. We just received a group of letters, about 427 letters from a woman named Margaret White, who was a Presbyterian missionary living in Carmel from 1908 to early 1940s. And these are all letters from the Japanese community to her, but a lot of it deals with the building of the church there. And there are a number of artifacts in there that when they opened the church and things like that, I think would be really nice graphics to use. And there's a real history there of all that. We're in the process of scanning all those letters right now. So, And so be able to digitize them.
And, I will say even like on the flyers, because it's something Francesca and I were talking about just before this meeting, because, the document that gets passed out that highlights the path of history currently, it's not exactly a path of history. It is more of the Explore Monterey brochure. And the Explore Monterey brochure has a section kind of on the path of history, but it highlights a number of different museums and cultural sites in there. But the sites information, like either the websites, the hours, services have changed different during the pandemic as well as, so we have to update some of that stuff already. And I'd be, I think we're looking forward to kind of updating that as well as including the app information on there so that we can put together a new flyer. And so having a lot of that information, we'll be working on that. So whether we do something I would like to do something that's like a single kind of image that really highlights the path of history and these additional paths if we can, because then we can get it out to the California Welcome Centers, and then you get it out to the hotels, the different sites out there for people that are visiting Monterey, and they could all just grab that and really see that stuff. And then I will also note that at the corner at the parking garage, at the Franklin Street garage, there are multiple windows. I don't know if you've seen those spread by, and those need to be updated because those haven't been updated in years. And so if there's something that might fit in there, because if there's something specifically for Japanese history, that might be a great place to really start.
We can create things, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that would be a good spot. Any other questions or comments regarding the Pearl District path?
I wonder, Brian, what's the next step in this process to get this path of history? That we approve it, and I guess it has to go to the city council, is that correct?
I don't think
It
it's,
doesn't have to go to the city council, but the commission definitely can approve or not.
I'm sorry, it does not have to go to the council?
No.
It does not have to.
Okay.
so the commission,
Just for information, but what are the next steps that this commission needs to do to have this approved?
I think this commission can adopt this plan. And then if we go forward with we have this plan going forward to look at what is the next step with either historic preservation, like having an adopted plan, working on what are the next steps we want to do. Because the easiest steps is, of course, working on the digital content, working on working on updating adding these sites onto a digital kind of format and bringing this to Historic Preservation Commission. I don't think they don't need to adopt it, but I think for them to it would be an informational piece and get any feedback from them on anything would be helpful. But ultimately, Museums Commission should be the one approving this plan. And then we would look at whether we want to look for any grants and look with the different partners in the area about how do we do the markers, because speaking to the point of the markers that we have right now all need to be updated on the current path about what are we going to do? The gold markers in the ground, those, we have been updating as the city on the existing kind of path that was chosen. But the signs that like Monterey History and Art Association did, those white signs in the shape of Colton Hall, half of those are gone. And I don't know if those are going to be redone. And then the signs there's smaller signs that are outside of, for on sale markers that are outside of all of our sites that are on the walking tour. All of those need to be updated because on sale is no more. And so we've gone to that site got bought out. So really, I think after we approve this, it's trying to figure out where this fits in the priorities for the Museums Commission about updating the signage, putting together some funding or a grant process or whatever we need to do to really update the signage out there in the community. There are some banners, for example, like at Colton Hall, at Lower Presidio, that have some of the path of history items out there that we could be updating and figuring out where, as a group, should we be promoting, how should we be promoting this would be the next step, I think.
I know in the past, we've talked about that, have a central point where people can go, then take off, say, on the Pearl Street. And we've talked about that being at the East Village, right there, that little plaza there. And then the other one might be Coupa Malera or Colton Hall. Actually, our group, the Old Monterey Foundation, we've been looking at ways of upgrading the Transit Plaza, Simon O Plaza, which it's a pretty rundown area. It's pretty well known as there's a lot of police activity there. And one of the ideas there was, if the commission and the staff is that make that a historic area, entice people to go there. You can have both signs there. You can have a kiosk sign saying this way to Colton Hall and Coupa Malera and all that. Plus, if you go, that's to the west, but if you go east, you'll hit Pearl Street. So, I mean, just as an idea to kill two birds with one stone, it could be a historic area and it would clean it up and get people to use that area more.
Yeah, I agree. That's good.
Was there a reason for moving down to where they want to start the Pearl Street tour versus the East Village? Was that because of the parking structure or because of the buildings that are no longer there? And also in this new version of the Pearl Street, they've left out, they don't go by Alfredo's, which looks to me like a historic building.
I can look at that. What I would say, sorry, I went back too far down. What I'd say is, I mean, you've got you mean the site of the Washington Hotel, the East Village Coffee, right over there. I think there's a technical kind of starting point on here. I think people might use these in a different way because there was one aspect that we kind of talked about on the walk, which is, are people going to walk a certain path on this? Like, are they going to walk like one way or another? Or are they going to look for specific items in themes and genres as well? So if there's going to be something that's there. So the Washington Hotel is not very far from the other sites that are on here. So the Washington Hotel is is currently on the path of history, but the marker's been taken down. That's one of the sites that's on the path of history technically, but the marker's not there. So we have to figure out how do we implement those markers and the paths in between. I don't know what the eventual plan is going to be for markers like in the ground or not. So I think that's something that this commission can really discuss in the future about like, how do you want to connect those paths between those? One of the aspects that is not really involved in here, you will see, is the Rumsey and Ohlone and the Esalen Ohlone tribes. Like, how do we tell their stories and add that information onto here? Because this is pretty much, a lot of these are really tied to architecture or the person that lived there. And the Rumsey and Ohlone were here before and they still continue to live here in the community. So it's about how do you connect those places. I think that having, when you're walking in between sites, there are some sites that we could add on there, including at the cemetery, or at El Estero, or in between different sites. Like, can we add additional markers in there that kind of help tell the story in between, because they can be all around in there. So just thinking like, how do we connect is something we could look at in the
But I
future.
think if I understand what Bill was saying, that East Village
Mhm,
area, that little plaza there would be kind of a central place to go,
mhm.
the kiosk there, where you could incorporate history of the Rumsen people and other things on that panel,
Mhm.
plus pointing people out in the direction of other places to go, which I think would be I think it's a good idea to do that. I think it'd be easier for people to do it that way.
And I think that's something for the next stage of this. It's like more of the implementation about it, because like I said, that side of the Washington Hotel where East Village is now at is very important, and is also in the California Constitution Convention. There was a number of the people stayed there at the hotel during the convention, the delegates. But we could figure out how to best implement this at the next stage, about like, these are just adding these specific sites and adding on there. This is the recommendation from them. And so the implementation of signage, gathering spots, where to focus, like the maps and everything like that, I think would be the next stage. Or whether that would be a subcommittee, a staff, how do we get this into that next go around? Because where I see is that, okay, you have the plan, and like I said, the easiest way is to do something digital. But if you want to have the physical markers and the wayfinding and this, and something that really points you to like, this is Monterey history and this is where we want to point you out. I think with that, we need the funding, we need the grant, and we need something that's we could bring to, like Community Foundation of Monterey County has been for years supportive of Monterey history projects. So this is something like how do we prioritize this as a group and a city for the future? And a city.
Well, you covered, you covered it well. This is guidelines, basically. And for the next project, if you decide on the next project to implement, besides a digital path or on an app or various cell phone, ways, you may want to create or look for granting to create a project that might be, say, Pearl Street or the new Monterey Canyon Row as pilot projects. And using this as guidelines. I mean, it's good in many ways. I mean, there are omissions and there's been some corrections done on this. So I think you do have a solid piece to begin with. And then if you decide tonight to adopt this, you can think about in the future an implementation plan of some sort and begin thinking, okay, as Brian was saying, you can start with the digital part of it. I think it's probably the easiest, the most accessible thing to do. And then later, for another project in the future, actually have physical markers, interpretive panels, that type of thing for a path. So that's just to reiterate some of the things that Brian's already said, but to situate it in what would be the process. Process is, adoption first, and then you may add, subtract, in the future from this in creating, a new Pearl Street or a new Monterey. Regardless, you have this as your guidebook right now, and it has the outlines. It doesn't have everything in it, maybe, that you might want to do in the future. So those are just some of my off the top comments that I think would help the commission, think about what's next, as Bill asked.
I think the key point is to get the data together and make it available electronically. Worry about having the physical parts later when we've got some money.
I agree, because where I would see it as is that if you have a pilot, if we have something that's a marker, a report, something on digital, it makes a much stronger application too for other funders, which is basically we have the background, we have this process, we already have something existing, and it really is helpful for us to have a framework going forward, and then we look for all of our partners. So that's where I think it'd be good.
So who's doing the digital?
Me and community service learners. So it's a number of the ones that have been done are actually the Path of History. So I had Path of History content that was added, and that was actually a docent and who's been working at our Presidio Monterey Museum, and she also works at MMA, Monterey Museum of Art. So she's been uploading all of that on the Path of History content on the app. And then the cemetery tour, I took a lot of content that was from Dennis's old walking tour of the cemetery of El Encinal. And some of those, and then had a service owner from CSUMB help me out on that. We adding that. So those things, it's all on the app that we currently have.
And that app is,
That's the Monterey Walking Tour app. And that includes, that's the one that has public art on there. It has the Path of History content, El Encinal. And then it has, it's the on sale content, which was the phone tours turned into digital. So I've been working on that with service owners to add the content. And with that, I could add a separate path that is just Pearl Street. And I could add a separate path that is New Monterey Walking Tour. And then what it would do, what I mean by depending on the starting point, because on that kind of thing, when it's digital, you can see it's like looking up a restaurant on Yelp. You say, what's the closest site to you? You know, and then it would tell you where the closest thing, and you can either do it as a walking path on a tour, or you can say what's closest to you. And with all the write-ups, we could do it for more expansive or kind of more basic. But I think just starting off with the more basic, because then you start doing into finding the research of getting old photos and getting more history about each site.
Any more questions or comments? Is this something we're supposed to vote on, or is this, no? Then we'll-
I think could we choose to, no?
Okay,
Okay. So I think we could put that in a later meeting then. This is the new Monterey. We have our number of sites. We have the Bear Flag Building. We have Maccabee Beach.
Mhm.
These Monterey Canning Company, Pacific Biological Laboratories, the Wing Chong Building, Sea Pride Packing Corporation, the Cannery Row Worker Shacks or Worker Housing, the site of the Lone Star Cafe, the home site of Joan Kwok Mui, the Mariposa Hall, Carpenters Labor Union Hall, and 799 Hawthorne Street, Colburn House, St. Mark Coptic Orthodox Church, Monterey Peninsula Hospital, the Green Mansion, the new Monterey Branch Library, also in Schultze, and Aeneas Sardine Products Company, and site of the Monterey Fishing and Canning Company. So those are the sites of the new Monterey. Let's see if I can get there's a walking. Yeah, I can print out an email, a full copy of this as well. But this one, when we did look at this we tried walking through, when we tried doing this path as a walking path, and we went from connecting through the lower Presidio and found it was quite difficult to get through some of that area over there. So the walking path and the recreation trail seemed like a better, more direct approach for something like this. So this is one of those ones where we would also, when we would look at adopting this and implementing of how would we implement something like this in that area, where would we want to start a path on this? There's a lot of markers right now in Cannery Row. And so I think implementing this and highlighting a lot of that with more information on those buildings would be helpful. And any questions or comments on this? Otherwise, I'll send this document out to all the commissioners after this.
And the Canada one is a little more complicated to connect all those dots.
Mhm.
And, but yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive list.
you missed our Victorian, but it's a little farther up the hill. People may not want to hike up there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Just separate, huh?
Yeah, there's a number also, I think, of like when we looked at it of, I read through a number of the reconnaissance surveys too from the city and the planning department, but I think this will be good to bring forward at a few, as I mentioned, I think so. Hopefully either this month or next month, there would be a Historic Preservation Commission meeting, and then we could bring it back just for adoption right after that. That's interest to the commission. And any other comments or questions?
After adoption, or if you agree to adopt it in future meeting, you can, once you move to an implementation or you start thinking about different projects, you can divide up the new Monterey one into a Cannery Row and a new Monterey, and make it easier for some people. Because as you mentioned, Tim, it is comprehensive. It's pretty extensive. It covers quite a bit of territory, with a hill involved and so that would be possibilities for the commission to entertain. But that's a future decision to be made. And for tonight, you're receiving this and you'll be reviewing it. So the key will be the future, if it's brought for adoption.
So, idea of the adoption, that would be at a later meeting, right? Not yet today.
Yeah, I think we could just do it informally at this point, what the commission thinks, and then we bring this to the HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission. And then after that, because we had talked at our ad hoc subcommittee about bringing this to the Historic Preservation Commission before approval. And I just haven't been able to get on their agenda yet, just because the meetings have been canceled there. So once we can get to there, I think bringing it forward, just do as an informational, I'll get an update from them and then bring it back here for final approval if that's of interest to the commission.
So do we need to make a motion and move it forward?
I don't think you need to make
Okay.
a motion. Yeah.
I just trying to follow mine.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. So then we move on to item 3.
Just see if there's any public comment.
Public comments. Peter, have anything to say? Anybody here on Zoom? All right, then we'll move on to number 3, receive update on museums and cultural arts revenues.
All right. Thank you, Chair Thomas. We just want to highlight something in case it comes up if you saw this, if you're attending council meetings. First off, to start with is that for the every year that we look at what's called a master fee schedule for the city of Monterey. And we've been using the master fee schedule for room bookings for Pacific Biological Labs for tours. So we used to be able to, people would book the space as a private rental versus a tour. So we've been using the tours cost as our fee, but we're not allowed to do private tours at this time because the site is not fully ADA accessible. So typically when we do a tour, I believe it's $52.50 for a group. And when we, so I updated the fee schedule for the city for this to kind of help cover the cost, because typically what happens with that is we have a staff member there and then we have a docent and a museum docent to lead the tour of there. So what we have on there is, what we have on there is basically for this of doing a private tours for Pacific Biological Laboratories, Colton Hall Museum, or Presidio of Monterey Museum. So these are not for educational groups. This would be for private groups asking for us to go and open up the museum and give them private tours of the space, actually charging for a group of 1 to 4 people $60, like a fee of that. And then for each additional person, it would be $15 for the tour. And then we do have a Monterey resident discount and education school groups being free. And so this also allows us to do fee-based services there. So if we wanted to hold an event at one of these sites in the future, that the fee schedule allows us to charge on there for some kind of event, which it did not prior. We didn't have that in the fee schedule for museums. So I think this is just a way for us to get an increased revenue at these sites for certain types of services and programs. And then I follow through with that. After that, I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the revenues for the museum trust fund accounts. I know this question has come up in the past. So far, the This is as of February 29th. Through July 1st through February 29th, you'll see on there museum contributions. These are the private donations, $3,456. The tour revenue from the Pacific Biological Laboratories is $525, and sale of promotional items, $7,726. So the revenue total to date, $11,708. And that's where typically I could see us increasing the costs, increasing revenue in future years by having more items or charging more for the tours, because I think we are getting more tour requests coming in for different sites. And I think it helps us offset the cost of our museum staff to charge a private charge for that. Otherwise, the Colton Hall itself will be open consistently for free. Presidio, Monterey Museum, those are free. And we still have our Pacific Biological Lab second Saturday tours for free as well. So there's still access to all of those sites for free. But it's when somebody calls us and says, I want to do a tour at 9 a.m. on a Friday morning. Can you come and do this tour? And we have to open up the building and take everything down and set up everything. And it takes quite some time to do that. I want to give you also just an update on where the financial status, Commissioner Castagna. Francesca pointed at me. I did the Pacific Biological Labs. I created a bunch of t-shirts, the t-shirt design, cards, the Monterey Angels cards. I redrew the Monterey Angels and been selling those cards. The stickers from Pacific Biological Laboratories. Those are also our books that we sell over there at the lab. Colton Hall. We sold some bags and different things like that. So some of those just promotional merchandise that I created. Some of it's our books, but it was trying to get a lot of those, pushing some of those to kind of increase the revenues when people come by. Thank you. Yeah, the Pacific Biological Laboratories is like our highest seller for items. I think people coming in there. The one thing that I have, if you've been in there, you may notice though, is that I have not reordered a lot of the books there unless there's something we can get at wholesale. So for example, if we can't get the book Cannery Row at wholesale, I don't want to buy it at retail and sell it at retail. Because if you could buy it for cheaper on Amazon, good for you. That's good, and I just don't want to hold on to, we don't have a big enough budget for us to buy items at retail and sell at retail. And so we had a lot of items before that were, when I went to go reorder them through certain accounts, they were no cheaper than the regular user. So books that by, like, we do have books through like Arcadia, and we have local authors. So we added a book by Nancy Ricketts that's, from her family, sent over here, and Jan Straley regarding Ed Ricketts. So those books right there, where we're getting them very specific to the lab, I think there's a lot more value to that, of selling books like that at the lab, where we get them at wholesale. They're unique to the space, and we make a small revenue, and the bookseller is really tied to the space.
You think $15 a head is maybe on the low side for private tours? You don't want to go to $20 a head?
I think, good question. I think we're just starting off to see how, especially a site like Colton Hall with up to about 30 people, how the revenues would go on there. Because I've heard that with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, they charge for their private tours in there. I don't know how much that is right now, $20 or $25, I think it is, for their private tours inside. So I think we're trying it off to see if it would still be accessible on that. And that I know that Monterey State Historic Parks charges like $10 or so for their walking tour. So it's something to just still try to keep it accessible and not have like a youth price or adult or senior. It's just something smaller for that, but really starting off with a 1 to 4, because right now what it is that you could have a group of up to 18 people and we charge you $52.50. If you have a group of 2 people, we charge you $52.50. So this just gives us a little bit more, where if you have that, 10 people, you're getting the additional 6 at $15, right? So you're 90, so you're now getting 150 rather than $52.50. So it's not a huge revenue, and I think we can adjust it at the next master fee schedule based on how much, if we get more revenue this coming year. I'd like that too. We can't hold that as of right now because of the ADA. And that's where later on I'll talk a little bit more about the ADA access in there. But the thought is if we could make that site more something like that, that could be a good revenue generator. And I will say that in future years, we may want to look at something like that at other sites as well, because there's, most museums these days do not make money off of gate count. They don't make their money off of gate count. They make their money off of private donations, events, private rentals. There's a lot more revenue that could be made off of something like that. It depends on the site. I believe we've, at this point, we put in for Pacific Biological Laboratories 15, but we typically have up to 18 or so. 16. Yeah, we have docents, because what happens is that it's the per room, so right now we're just listing at this time, I believe at 15, because we have the docent and the staff. But the Colton Hall, I believe, is 30 at this time. And then because usually sometimes what'll happen with Colton Hall is we'll have a class of 60, and then we'll come in there, it'll be like 30 and 30. Then we just split the class. We'll do 30 in one room and then 30 outside in Friendly Plaza, and then swap them out. Yeah.
At one time, I confirmed with the city building official that the number that would be allowable and it was 18. That's including docents, so it would be 18. And that has stand firmed ever since we established the number. Many people have asked over the years, why can't we have more? Well, as you know, it's a historically fragile building, just doesn't have the capacity for that many people. But as Brian brought up, the great advantage is the yard. And so if we could somehow manage that, get people out there with good weather, that would be the way to go.
Yeah.
The old barbecue fired up.
Spark it up out there. Yeah. With that also, just if you have it here, there's the museum trust funds. This is the Fund 818, which is Fund 818 is what we have on our internally we use for our museum trust funds. It's $203,785. Ferguson Family Fund Trust. This is specifically to be used for Presidio of Monterey in Presidio Monterey Museum. That is $83,000 in there. And the Frank Emilio Lacaza Reserve Trust, that's only $125 still left in it. And as I mentioned last year, that was the funds that were used to purchase the California Constitution Convention documents that are in there.
So Brian, is that 83,000 and the 125, is that part of the 203?
That's a great question. I believe actually, I don't believe so.
Oh, you don't believe so?
I don't believe so. I can look back on there. What's kind of the liquid number on there
Okay.
too?
So we have, or the city has, we have over $200,000 in museum trust funds that we can use for museum purposes, which is very, very general, as long as it's approved by the commission and the council.
Right. Yeah.
Why
So
don't we
there's,
spend some of that?
I have some requests coming up in there. I mean, some of these are, I think we have to be very prudent on what is what, and I can follow up with our finance department if there's any restrictions. I mentioned the special funds, because the special funds are funds that we have to use for that specific purpose, right? So if there's anything in there, and I could ask if the 203 is the blanket of the overarching amount, or if that's all of the including, and I'll figure that out.
Well, the library sort of has library trust funds, and that's a big slush fund that they can spend on a wide variety of items. I think this might be very similar.
Yeah, so the library trust fund, we still go through the board of library trustees because the board of library trustees is actually in the city charter. So the board of library trustees recommends the trust fund budget, which we then go through city council, same thing for expenditures. But we get everything like the Friends and Foundation and donations come to us and we go through there. But yeah, so like you'll see here, these Fund 900, these are special funds in here. And so I believe, actually going back on that, I will say the Ferguson Family Trust, I believe the 83,000 is from that 203. I'll take that back because it's under the 818. While these 900 funds, these are also special funds. And these special funds are not included in that 818. So these ones are called out specifically for cultural arts donations. You'll see there, that's the $13,479. This is for conservation specifically, conservation work. That could be eaten up really quick on conservation of just about any piece of art at this time with that limited amount of funding. And chamber music donations I know this has been really of interest to the commission here is the chamber music program. This is where that fund is right there. So it's for folks wanting to know where the funds go, where like the revenue comes, where the expenditures, this is how much money we have for chamber music at this time, which is $4,865. And the Cannery Row mural restoration, $5,872.84. I will mention on this because it might show up on KION tonight. Right before here, I was out on Cannery Row talking to a reporter regarding the two Bruce Harris murals, the wood panels that were there that, may recall. The Cannery Row mural restoration is the Hotel Clement, the Intercontinental, when that was a construction site. 1989, there were 50 different artists chosen, and there was these 4x8 wood panels that surrounded the project. And the murals were supposed to last for 5 years, and then they started to deteriorate. And later on, there was some redoing of some of the murals and restoration work. And some of the original murals were also auctioned off, but the remainder are in the city collection. And in 2023, I was out during the storms, just checking out all of our different sites because we were having trees fall down and roof leaks. And I went to go look at the Cannery Row worker houses because there was a tree that had fallen down right next to them. And I went to the lab to check out. And the two last murals that were up were the Bruce Harris murals. And those ones, the post had snapped. And so the murals were kind of just swaying in the wind. And those are ones we had brought up prior commission meetings about getting some kind of restoration work. I had those taken down, put in storage. It looks like they've suffered termite damage as well as just water damage in the whole bottom. And so I did talk to a conservator and that those murals were maybe beyond repair. And that's where we've talked about the committee. We looked at having the replica of the original painting added onto the Bruce Harris Way with an interpretive panel. So that is in the later thing in there. But the Cannery Row mural restoration, this fund specifically was created when there was a mural restoration project on the original murals that were made of wood, plywood panels. And we have a number of those done by Dedini, done by different artists in the community that are inside of our storage garage at this time. So I just want to highlight that funding right there is specifically for that project.
Brian, question, do any of these funds generate interest? Do they grow each year?
I've looked at the 900 funds. The 900 funds, I believe, do not. And the 810, 818s do. Certain ones on there do. Yes. Yeah.
Just point out, the weekly had a nice,
Your mic.
John, your
Your mic.
mic.
so I could just speak loudly. Anyway, on that page also, there's a photo of you with the boat model. A very nice image that's in the weekly from today. So everybody should look at that.
Oh, I'll have to take a look. And then last two on here, reserve accounts. These are, we have some funds dedicated for artifact acquisition, 11,597, and designated for art acquisition. This one's a 101, 164,963. So there is an art acquisition fund. So those ones are the specific funds that we have available for some of these purposes. And I believe the spending from these funds also would require us to go with a recommendation to council for something if we were to buy a piece of art with this.
You know, one other, one other funding source we talked about, Mike, Rennie and I met with Brian and kicked around this idea of raising money for Colton Hall, just like the Friends of the Library raises money for the library. The city attorney came up with a great idea. Well, you could create another nonprofit, but we have the existing nonprofit, the Old Monterey Foundation, that stays as a financial agent. So they could be the financial agent for any Colton Hall contributions. Then you don't have to spend money and do the nonprofit and all the annual reporting. And then over and above that, Brian came up with the idea about the grant.
Yeah, and I can talk on that in my staff report too, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. But there is a Community Foundation for Monterey County grant that's available, and we did that before the funding, before we used for the report for this path of history. But my thought is that we do ask for funding to actually do some of the work. We have a report on Colton Hall, and I would like to just spend money on updating the exhibits and some of the things that I know the commission has asked about in the past as well. So really just use the older report to guide us and spend money on updating some seating and exhibit spaces in Colton Hall. And that's due next week.
Any more questions or comments? Anybody out there in the public land? All right. And I guess we'll move to approve the expenditure of museum trust fund.
Thank you, Chair Thomas. That's me again. That's so this is basically tying into some of the trust funds. So there are two projects that I'm requesting funding from the Museums Commission. One is to add interpretive signage on Bruce Ayres Way and at Booth's Cannery on the recreation trail. And folks may know that Booth's Cannery was the first cannery there in Monterey, and we have the stone right there, which has a bronze plaque on the inside, but we also do have the Cannery Row label. I know that one was up at Ryan Ranch, where we have the Cannery Row, the label project all throughout the city. And the thought is to put a label there at the site of, it's right at Fisherman's Wharf, right at where the recreation trails starts by the other Fisherman's Monument. And I'm trying to think of the saint, but I can't remember at the moment. And that would be like an interpretive panel about Booth's Cannery right there at the base. And then the other one would be at Bruce Ayres Way. And that was the one to replace the mural that has fallen down, because the paint is peeling, the wood is rotting out. And I think as Chair Thomas has connected me with the owner of the original painting, because Bruce Ayres did the mural project was based on original art that he had done. So all of the artists that did artwork along there was based on Bruce Ayres's work. And so he did the mural based on his old painting. And that painting is in a private collection, and we can get a scan of that and then make a panel and something about Bruce and Jean Ayres there on Bruce Ayres Way. I think would be a great way to recognize them on there and not crowd it right next to the worker houses, but something along the path further up, I think would be great. The second part is we have our study done by ARG in 2019, which was a Pacific Biological Laboratories accessibility study. This came up with two primary solutions for ADA access to the building. There is California Historic Building Code, which does give you a little bit of leeway on a building like this, but they had two main options. One was called a blind door, or one is the garage door opening. And the blind door would be, if you're familiar with the front of the building, there's the garage, and then there's the staircase up. The blind door would be at the garage, right next to the stairs. It would be like a false door that goes down through the garage area. Now, if they do that, or the garage entrance, because of the height, they actually have to increase the access in the front, the living room, the living space. And if you go into the front space was Ricketts' bedroom. It's where also the kind of the meeting space. There's a lot of drawings. I've seen drawings by Bruce Harris of Steinbeck and Ricketts and the folks out there. There are different photos in there. And that would raise up there. They would have to box out and create a little area there if either the garage door or the blind door were done on that side. There would be possibility of potentially going through the option that I'm looking at with Architectural Resources Group is to look at updating the study and then having a cost estimate. So we have a solid estimate for what it would cost to do the access through the coastal easement on the side. So we would go through the coastal easement on the side of the building, creating like a Lula lift or something similar to what we have outside here at Council Chambers, and going up and redoing the exterior staircases and the exterior door going in there. The other part is then where a second restroom would be created, because if they were to if the single restroom were to be converted to ADA standards, it would actually either have to pop out several feet out, or they would have to do some major modifications. And so that could be a 1+1, and it could still be a same restroom if we created a restroom either in the basement area or under the stairs. And I was thinking of working with them on requesting something that's as minimal as trenching as possible because of the historic nature of underneath and on the concrete. So that having something there underneath would possibly be good. And then possibly like building a decking or something along the back. So it makes the back accessible for moving a space, like for using for events, having students out, different things, and like a viewing space in there so you could see the concrete or restoring some of that. Partially, there is potential funding available in working with the Western Flyer Foundation on doing some work there at the lab about having access to the doing education and tours there as well. And so I think having an updated report that gives us a cost estimate of how much it's going to cost to do all of this work would be critical for us to go to the next stage to make the building accessible, and then starting to allow more groups to use it, and but still preserving the history of the space. And I don't want to do anything that would majorly damage the building for the future. So with that, I would just say on that part, the total project cost is $15,000. So at this point, I'm asking for up to $10,000 in museum trust funds and spending the remainder of $5,000 or possibly more through our general fund, what I have available for on this fiscal year for the budget, which I have on for printing and different amounts that I have at the moment for the general fund.
Just to get the discussion going, I move we approve the granting of the funds for your request.
All in favor?
Oh, wait, can I have just one comment? I think those members who were on the commission back in 2019 completely agreed that the two options proposed by AARG were very, very bad. In fact, they were surprising to come out of a well-known historic group to come up with these two options. And I pulled back the report and wondering why didn't they explore this coastal rec trail access? And they say, use of the public coastal access path. This was dismissed as an option since it would require an easement. And well, ask for an easement.
Yeah.
I actually talked to the general manager of the Intercontinental Clement with, I think Brian, and I forget, maybe you were there, Bob. I went over and talked to him. He said he's very open to it. So I would just say, rather than, why don't we, first step first, why don't we get this easement or an agreement from the Intercontinental that they would be willing to do this? And then the ARG would work with the city staff and the hotel to make sure that they're acceptable to this design. Because the idea was that it wouldn't impinge on the pedestrian access. You walk right off the pedestrian access into the elevator and go down. But I do think the first step is to get their approval, because if they're not going to modify the easement, hopefully it doesn't have to go back to the coastal commission. But we have to get their approval for that easement to allow that to be modified. So that's my only suggestion.
But I had a question relating to ARG also. Why, is there something that's happened that requires us now to get an update? Did the code change for ADA or anything like that?
No, so my initial, there have been some discussions I've had with Western Flyer Foundation about interest in making the building more accessible
Okay,
for the public and potential funding that might be available to actually fund the work. And so what I don't want is to do damage the integrity of the building.
absolutely.
And so my thought was that the report that the current report we had, the options looked to me like they would damage the historic integrity of that building. And so coming up with a new option, a third option with an updated cost estimate that was done by a historic group that would say, this is how much it would cost you to do these improvements up here. And also bring this to people's attention, because I do think that we, as a community, I mean, as somebody that I've done a number of the tours there in the lab or been there with the docents, people have a lot of love of that facility, and they have a love of Ricketts or the men's club and just the different stories that are there. And I think it's important for us to kind of follow up as we can now. There are some elements of that where we go in there and do we do the floors? Do we do it the outside of the building? And some of the boards are rotting out, and those kind of things. Like, we need to make an effort right now to really go forward and help to preserve that building. I really think that it's something that we should be spending attention on in the next couple of years, is trying to get that building accessible for the future and also continue to be restored. I think the last repairs were done in 1999. Is that, do you recall the last time?
That was the major restoration.
Yeah. The major restoration work was 1999. So it's been 25 years. It's wood. It's right there on the coast. And even those, the tanks that were done by National Trust for Historic Preservation, some of those are starting to deteriorate. So it's something that I think that building needs some attention. So that's getting an updated report and really doing our best to follow through to make sure that it's funded and also done in the correct way. So that's why I wanted an updated.
I'm concerned. We've had some of these reports done for buildings at the light station in Big Sur. They do the first report, it's incomplete. We hire them to complete the report and we never get a finished product. We could just keep going back and keep asking. So I don't know if there's a way to ensure that we get an answer to this thing, or if we have to go to another firm that might have a better record on things like this. It's just a caution.
I will say, I can say on that, ARG has been working with us, and the person that did this, I actually connected with her on this. There's a number of different people that work on that. They are actually the one working on the Colton Hall repointing project, and they're working on a couple other projects here. So there's someone the city has worked with a number of times on other projects as well. So I think that was something where they had experience of all the ins and outs of the building. So rather than doing a full new study,
Okay.
this would be more like focus specifically on this option and give us a cost estimate for this option.
Okay.
And that's really what I wanted to do, because I didn't want to open it up and then
Yeah.
just have to edit it too much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So help me, what are the deliverables on this particular project?
The deliverables will be a model of a accessible facility, what actually that would look like for going through a coastal easement of access to the lab, making that space now accessible again through ADA, and what kind of work would need to be done on designing the the rear staircase, the access to the second floor, access inside of the basement, where's the main access point, and then anything in the back on there, and then giving us a cost estimate for how much that work would cost to make the building ADA accessible.
So this is actually going to be the design.
Basically, it won't be like an architectural, won't be like architectural drawing, but it'll be the basic report that would show, similar to the 2019 report, which showed like a model. It showed like a digital model of the space of where everything was in there. So you would get a physical model, which you can then give to a contractor or architect that would then start working on the project.
So concept.
It was essentially, it's the concept that would be on there.
We
And
still have to get the actual construction drawings
Mhm.
on top of that.
Correct, yes. So the construction drawings, and I would be probably working with a specific identified contractor or project manager on that. But this at least gets us the start of getting this in there to figure out how much money, what are we looking at for a facility like this, about restoring it to where we can make it accessible.
Anybody else have any questions?
Well, when we say restoring it to make it accessible,
Mhm.
we're not talking about restoring the entire building.
No.
Just the parts that are needed to be strengthened and restored for this accessibility.
Correct. So some of, so some of those are, I shouldn't say restore, shouldn't be the right word on there, because I do think there are things like, basically what you're looking at is the rear staircase is not at ADA when it was built. It's the railings are too low, or the banisters are at a different standard for what you have right now. So it's really about saying, to me, it's the front staircase. I don't think we should look at that as the main entrance, because then you have to look at that as like a lift instead of the main stairs, and that takes away the facade of the building. So it's looking at the rear as the main entrance point here for the facility. How do you redo the stairs? How do you do a lift up to the second floor? Is it integrated with there? Where do you put in a restroom? How is the restroom accessible for it so then you don't have to damage the second floor restroom? Because that's a big thing for the men's club, is the Sophia Loren room. So those kind of aspects for there, where you're preserving the history of the building, the historic nature, while making it accessible.
Do you see this restroom inside the existing envelope or outside of the existing envelope?
Their initial design had it underneath the staircase, but that's when the entrance was coming through the garage. I can see potentially, I mean, I'm not an architect, but I could see if you've been in the lab, we have the structural post in the center of the basement, where you have there's a facade wall, and then there's a big storage area right in there, or even the, kind of like where the baby flyer is right in there. I would like to work with the architecture group to see about putting it somewhere in the basement, so that, if you're having plumbing, you have to bring in plumbing lines, and the further out you put a plumbing line in there, the more potential digging and trenching you have to do coming off of there. So the closer you could put it in, either in the basement or somewhere, so it's not really damaging the look of the property, I think would be ideal. And then the additional bathroom upstairs would be considered basically a +1 bathroom. So it'd be one ADA bathroom plus one historic bathroom.
I just hate to see it anywhere inside the existing envelope. It's going to change the atmosphere of the basement. And, it would seem to me that it ought to be integrated with this, whatever you're putting outside, that restroom ought to be integrated with that.
I think that's where, by where they had a design, that's where a lot of the designs, the concept is going to have to come up there, because whether they come up a concept of it outside or inside, and they had the thought about putting something portable underneath the staircase, and there was one of their thoughts before. And so whether that would be integrated or not, because when you come in on the coastal easement, there is that kind of a wall that protects a lot of the view out there. I'm just saying, like, where I see, and like I said, I'm not an architect on there, but my main concern would be trenching or doing plumbing or doing something like that, that you need to bring in from a water line from the street to a place like that, that you have to go digging through there if something like that needed to be done, which I don't know. But I think it's a good discussion point for the architecture group of having it, like, if we got this money and getting a committee together to actually work on this project.
Any more questions, right? So we need to make another motion to approve the fund.
John made the motion.
Made a motion and it was seconded. And Mike.
You second?
I can't second my own motion. Mike.
We're recommending for funds to council.
We, now I lost my train of thought.
We would I believe we would do a recommendation for spending funds that we would give that to council for expending the funds. Right?
Nobody made a motion to amend it, so. That wasn't your intent.
Well, I think it was more guidance to staff that before, hopefully we can get that easement in the next month or so. I'm gonna meet with the general manager. I'm just saying it makes sense that before we actually spend the money,
Mhm.
I mean, Brian has it authorized, or we can authorize it, it has to go to the council, right? But before the money is actually spent or entered into a contract, we have some say on that easement.
I think Brian would probably do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's even because we wouldn't have everything in writing with John
Yeah.
Turner. We would just even having a verbal, so I can work with you and the Commissioner Winkowski.
Right.
Yeah.
And we all approve of it? Yeah?
Well,
All right.
I'm sorry?
Did we vote?
Yeah, we all in favor say yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. And I plan on working on the interpretive signs with Chair Thomas too. So
I'm
for,
sorry?
I plan on working on the interpretive signs. The interpretive signs for folks will be working on those with Chair Thomas on the for Booth's Cannery, everything. And I think the last item is probably our quarterly update, right?
Uh,
And this is a.
Happy comments, yeah?
So we have the quarterly update. We have the old jail. I took down the interpretive signs as of right now. Those are in process of being updated. You will see that you may have already seen or may have already mentioned it, the new mannequin added to the tortilla flat jail sale. Francesca coordinated our Christmas and the Adobe activities, December 8th and 9th. And also thanks to our Rotary Club for decorating Colton Hall. So I think Christmas and the Adobe was quite well received again. So the PBL, we've had a CBS Saturday Mornings film a segment for Western Flyer. They filmed a couple hours of video over there, but of course it was cut out. So it was only like 1 second where they showed the lab on that, but they were telling me that they weren't sure where they would add the content. So I don't know if it'll be used at another time. But the Western Flyer Foundation is working on another documentary, and that one I worked with their team and they cut that out too. So I don't know where we might get more at some other time. And I just mentioned we're developing an online tool to request private and educational tours. Mentioning that I know Francesca and I've been in contact multiple times about this because we're getting more and more requests for tours, and they come in via email or phone or whatever, and we need to have a way for us to just get the request, book what day do you want, and putting on a tool for that. Presidio Monterey Museum, the sign in front of the museum has been replaced. You'll see that there's a photo in the packet as well. I had our sign shop make that The artifact specialist interviews were held. We have somebody starting March 16th. I don't like sharing the person's name or information until they have their shoes inside the building, because you never know what happens right until that date. So I'm looking forward to introducing them at a future commission meeting. We talked about a little bit about Page and Turnbull. On there, the Monterey Walking Tour app is live on the Apple website and Android platforms. And please make sure to download that, check it out, give me feedback on it. I'm looking at updating that with our service centers as well. There's a photo on the back of the packet also that was in our garage. We had a storage garage, and there was a box that said Berquist in there, and it was the Myron Oliver's younger sister's documents. And so I was looking, and I said, and I saw photos of Myron and Dorothy Oliver in there along the wharf, and I thought, I wonder if I'll find a photo of the Western Flyer in there. And sure enough, I found an old negative, and I brought it to Commissioner Castagna, who scanned it in there. Thank you, Commissioner Castagna.
Very good shape.
So surprising considering the
Well,
box.
it's 4x5 negative too, that helps.
So it was really interesting to see that with all of the working boats out there at the time. It was there's some other great photos in that box and other things that we need to work on. We had our CBS Mornings. You may have seen that clip that came out. There was a CBS Mornings clip on Monterey. They came out, and I was over at Gordon House clearing out some stuff for the staff. And my staff called me and texted me, said, hey, can you come back to the library? CBS is filming right now. And somebody had recommended on this, where they have a reporter, David Bennell, who's on CBS Mornings, where they give the 48 hours to visit a city. And somebody in the community mentioned they check out the California History Room. And so he got there, and I talked to Andres Garza, our local history librarian. I asked Andres to pull out some maps and some documents, some photos. And I said, while we're doing that, we have 1 hour of good light. Let's go to Colton Hall. So that's why we walked over to Colton Hall, was to see that, because I felt like that'd be a great thing to highlight there. So we went there to Colton Hall, filmed about an hour or whatever, then went back to the library. It's like 30 or 45 seconds total that I'm in there, but it was great to just highlight that kind of nationally about those sites. I submitted an application in the amount of $180,000 for a Save America's Treasures Preservation Grant. This is a matching grant, and this applied for Colton Hall for the repointing project, and also possibly added for drainage. So as I've mentioned before, we do have funding from a prior NCIP project for repointing at Colton Hall. In the 1970s, when Colton Hall was restored, they used a Portland cement, and when you get water inside of the rock or the cement, the water will expand inside of the cement, which is harder than the stone and cracks the stone. So if you look on the side, the wet sides of the building of Colton Hall, where there's the Portland cement, it has actually cracked stone in there. So and then there's metal nails set in there as well. So with this, there is funding set aside, I believe around $158,000 for repointing on that through NCIP. But I put in for the grant just because when you go in there, if you look, there's exposed wood around there as well that really needs to be repainted, and possibly a study for drainage around the building. Because in the long term, we need to figure out what's going to help that building stand another 175 years. Tomorrow's the 175th anniversary of Colton Hall. So we need to make sure that we do things like that that will support the long term of Colton Hall. So hopefully we get that grant. I'm not sure, but it is a national grant. And was mentioning earlier, I'm starting the application for a community impact grant with Community Foundation for Monterey County. That would be for exhibit spaces, panels, and seating at Colton Hall and the old jail. So that would update some of the exhibits there. The maximum amount is $50,000 that we can apply for. So I just have to look at the budget for what we're going to ask for at that space. And as Commissioner Wakowski mentioned earlier, I met with Commissioner Sovereign, Kimsey and Wakowski regarding funding for new exhibits, staffing and volunteers. We talked about 501c3 with the museums. And as I mentioned, the main thing we often have are the need for people, the volunteers, the staff and things like that. When we have events, it's who's setting up the event, who's doing the promotion for the event, who's booking the performer, getting the contract done. Like a lot of those things, they all take a lot of time behind the scenes, and it's hard to do this work along with all the other kind of activities. So the funding is one piece, but the staffing is the main component that I'm really interested on. And then I do know we've had the request last year regarding hanging the angels in more places. So Francesca and I hung them at the OCO Adobe over on Alvarado Street, at Colton Hall, Monterey Public Library, and at the old Monterey Business Association building, Alvarado and Del Monte. So we hung some out there too. So we just hung a couple extra out there in the community. And then I just want to highlight there are 3 arts related projects currently under review by NCIP. So just to bring these to your attention, that these may come up for more information in the future. There's a phase 2 of a mosaic mural under Casa Verde Highway 1 underpass. This is Caltrans property, so it would need an easement for doing the work on that kind of a property. There's a community mural at the Wharf Marina Resource Recovery Facility, and this would be guided by Youth Arts Collective mentors. This is the 40th anniversary of the Monterey mural by Guillermo Granizzo. And so there's 3 parts to this request. One is to purchase another piece of Granizzo art and install in a prominent place. Call for art to produce another work in the Granizzo style to add to the collection and to freshen up of the current mural. So with that, just want to highlight those are some of the activities coming up and look forward to bringing on the new staff member in the coming weeks. Any questions or comments?
How are we paying for the new staff?
General fund. So the new staff person is paid out of the general fund.
And this is full-time?
This is regular part-time, same as Jordan was. So last fiscal year, during the budget negotiations, we moved it entirely. It was at one point, I could be wrong, but I believe it was Ferguson Trust and General Fund, and I had it moved entirely to General Fund for last fiscal year and then continue with, so I'm putting in that request for this upcoming fiscal year as well. There'll be General Fund.
Is this 3/4 time?
Yes. So 30 hours a week.
Not ready for a whole person?
I'm always ready for a full person, but this is as we know, this is a city built on history, and we have a number of, multi-million-dollar art and painting collection, sculptures all around, and the time needed for partnerships, for volunteers. There's a lot that can be done. And I know at that time, the funding was approved for regular part-time. Now, whether we could move it to full-time in the future, that would be a question for council approval and city manager approval. But at this time, we had the budget as is for this coming fiscal years as the person under, same as Jordan was. I will say there's potential. I see this as like there's a need for more like regular staff at different levels, because the artifact specialist, the work on that is artifacts, right? The work on that is that we have a number of displays, artifacts, things that need to be really well maintained. And, I continue to think about things like our Monterey Angels, which, the storage of them is not ideal. The items that we have in our vault, like getting the vault up to shape and spending time. So you can spend the time on community partnerships and kind of how do we work together, but then also we've got so much of our own things. So that artifact specialist, we have to balance that time. And I find another position in the future would be really needed, as we've had, to really help us manage all of the work that needs to be done here to highlight our multiple sites in the community.
Is there some way we could put a message to the city council, our main purpose is to advise them, that we are very short-handed.
Sure, your mic was off.
I'm wondering if there is some way we can raise the city council's awareness of how shorthanded we are and what the implications of that may be in the long term for both preservation and being able to publicize and make the tourism more active and interactive in the future.
So I would say on those, like if you, don't recall if the city budget, there was a budget survey that was out and where do you prioritize items? So if you've not already done that, make sure that if you prioritize where you think the budget should go on those things. They did a couple meetings in the public last week in 3 different meetings. I think about 10 people or so attended each one of those. So it wasn't a huge number of people each one. I would say talk directly to your council member if this is something you're interested in. And I know there will be budget sessions coming up. You know, I don't have a calendar for those dates, but when these come up to council, it's presenting and like what are of interest to the commission, you know, or saying things. So I think that I'm not sure if they would be, most likely would be like at a public comment session in there.
Those are fine for as individuals, but as a group chartered to advise the council with regard to these areas, I would think we would take a position that would be communicated to the council.
I would say that would be a good question to look at. I would look at because the city code has very specific kind of charter, like what the commission does regarding artwork and access to Colton Hall, but it doesn't make recommendations as far as I know regarding the budget. Wherein like the Board of Library Trustees, which I work with them on that, they make a recommendation for the budget per the city charter. So there's something specific on there and how they do it. I don't know because of how the other commissions, like this would be more similar to like a Parks and Recreation Commission, where how do they make the recommendation going forward to the city council? And I've seen some of the folks on that making comments regarding recreation or the sports center at different meetings, but there's no like formal presentation that's done at that point, as far as I'm aware of.
I guess I differ on that.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's not a recommendation that goes through of there, because there'd have to be a discussion item and an action item, right? If you were to go to council, like where that would go into a council and for something like that. So that's where I would see where would an item like that fit into a council agenda. And that's where I'm thinking it's something about talking directly with your council member if they're in a community, if you're at a community event, if they're in your neighborhood associations.
We are an organization called out by city action that says, give them advice.
And I'm just countering with there's specific the Monterey City Code has specific actions which are for the code, what the charters are for each commission. So that's where I'm just countering with saying that there's a specific action for the code of what each commission does. So that's where it is of
Where do we fall in the scheme of things? Can you give us the section numbers and
sure, I'll look up the city code real quick too.
this? Then we can maybe get together and decide how to read what the code says, because often there can be interpretations of the language in the code. We've been going through this with NCIP and NIP. And if you read, for instance, with NCIP, that's the overall title But if you read the fine print down inside of what NCIP is all about, it's neighborhood improvement program, very distinctly.
So, right, and that's, I believe the NIP is also a charter and not a code, not under
Yeah,
code,
it's
right?
in the city charter.
Right, so the,
It's harder to change than city code.
right, and so right, Museums and Cultural Arts Commission is under the code in section 2-8. So this it starts off with the composed of 7 members and special eligibility requirements and who's eligible for basically being on there. And then it goes to 2-8.01 special powers and duties. This is advise and make recommendations regarding the development and improvement of the city's museum to increase historic appeal, stewardship, and access. Advise and make recommendations to the city council regarding the acquisition, design, and development of city museum facilities. Advise and make recommendations to the city council regarding the purchase or deaccession of works of art in accordance to the collections policy. Accept or reject works of art. Create temporary advisory subcommittees composed solely of less than a quorum of the MCAC. Serve on a single purpose that is not perpetual. Encourage cultural arts, including historically oriented exhibits or events, and performing the visual arts projects and programs. Work with other civic or community groups to consider partnering with or jointly sponsoring events or projects related to history, museums, or cultural arts. And perform such other functions as a city council may direct. So I just mentioned this because what I was saying is that the Board of Library Trustees has a specific like budget that they oversee and we work through on there, and that's in their charter. On the Board of Library Trustees is under a city charter, where this is under city code, but doesn't say specifically regarding making recommendations regarding the budget or staff on there. So I would look at section 2-8 and 2-8.01 specifically for museum commissions. But it doesn't state specifically how, if there's a request from a commission for increased staffing, how is that done? So I just that's where I'm clarifying, is that the code doesn't have that as an action as far as I'm aware.
Well, I think that's,
I'm presenting.
that's well within interpretation of the development of, which was the phrase that's in there.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important phrase in the description, that we're to develop this. And the way to develop is to have sufficient staff to do all the things that need to be done to develop a program. But I have to go read it again, but I think that we can certainly come to an agreement that staffing is certainly an important element of doing anything.
I think what Mike and Bob have articulated is that there's a whole host of things that we could be doing.
Mhm.
With the current staff proposal, we're doing this much. With additional, especially full-time staff, we could be doing this much. And that's all we're asking.
Mhm.
So out of the current staff that's in the budget, what are we doing? What are we getting by with? And if we had an additional full-time staff member, what could we be doing? And I don't see the big issue just bringing that to the commission and we make a recommendation to the council.
So I'm just saying, I don't see there's a specific budget process, and there's not, as far as I've seen, a spot for the commission to have where does the commission present to council at? And I haven't seen that in the budget process. I've only been here since 2022, but I've not been around where a commission presents to council on a budget request.
Seems to me that if we have an agenda item to discuss future projects, and as part of that discussion.
Your mic.
John, your mic.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I don't speak enough, I guess. But as part of that discussion, we said, well, we can do these projects if we had another staff member. And after that discussion, make a motion to refer the discussion to the city council. I mean, we could do that and they might ignore us, but at least we would have done something.
Yeah, I would say especially budget and creation. That's why I mentioned that there will be budget hearings and budget sessions where where they can act on, because if this is something where if you're creating a position or recommendation, there's where is the position going to be funded as of right now? That's the city's going to ask us right now. Who's going to fund the additional time of that? Would that be trust fund? Would that be something like that? Because that could be something we could do.
That would be part of an ongoing dialogue with them about it.
Right, but I haven't seen that in terms of other commissions, and that's where I'm just aligning with the kind of that dialogue with the Recreation Commission, because I think it has to be kind of similar on that side.
But just because it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean we can't do it.
Well, it will be if it gets on the agenda or not. As you state, does it get on the agenda? And about how to do things when they're talking about specifically budgets and position control, because all of those things, those position controls, like how many positions you have and where those things, the position control is going to be done primarily during the budget hearing, where they'll say like this department has X number of staff and this department has X number of staff and this is the budget of here. And that's where I'm thinking that those come into, they adjust the position control and the budget at those hearings.
Well, I understand all that and, nothing might come of it. But at least if the commission as a whole feels strongly on this point, we should let the city council know. And whatever means you use to do that, whether it's an agenda item or whatever, we should do that just so they know how we feel. Nothing wrong with that.
For instance, one of the things we have not done in a number of years now is in the last paragraph or so, the Colton Hall music program.
Yeah.
And that's specifically in there that we should be doing a music program. And so we can't do it with the current staff. There just isn't enough horsepower. So we need a half-time staff person to do that. And if that's realistic, and you could bring that sort of thing to the commission and say, if the commission is interested in proceeding with the Colton Hall music program, we need X amount of personnel to do X, Y, Z and ABC, which is all involved in producing that program. And that's going to cost X dollars for that much person. And now we have a proposal that we can discuss and vote on and pass that. It's not from you, it's from the commission. We want to do this. And this is what it'll take. And this is the benefit to the community.
And we're not asking you to make a recommendation. I mean, you deal with the city manager and I'm sure you put out a good effort trying to get additional staff, but that's between you and the city manager. What we're asking is between us and the city council.
Mhm.
So we're not asking
get
you to make a recommendation. All we want is, this is what we can do with our current staff. These are other things that we could do if we had other staff. No recommendation from you. It's between us and the council.
I get that. I'm just saying for how do we get the alignment from getting a commission item like that on the agenda when there's a specific.
We put this
budget.
on the next agenda, April agenda, we vote on it and we send it to the council. The council does the budget in May and June. Put it on the next agenda. The staff report does not have to be that complicated. And again, no recommendation from you.
Any feedback? Nothing about the offline.
I'm sure the Parks and Rec Commission did not have enough staff to operate the sports center 7 days a week. I bet you that commission would be making a recommendation to the council. They would be making a recommendation, and they're not a charter either. So similar, if they didn't have enough staff to run the sports center, they would be saying that. We don't have enough staff to run the Colton Hall Museum. We don't have enough staff to do the Colton Hall candlelight concerts or the old art exhibits that we used to do. So that's all we're asking.
And so this is where I'm saying with like the sports center, people were talking at council meetings. If you were at, I don't know if you attend the council meetings, people were talking at the council meetings during public comment to talk about the decrease in the sports center staff. And that was a pretty consistent message that what people were going through over there to attend that under public comment. Because the council can't act on something like that, but there was a decrease during the pandemic of sports center staff in terms of the number of full-time staff. And people have been there's been an effort by them to go forward at different meetings to talk during public comment and mention the decrease in the staff and the need for that to return back. So that's why I mentioned for it, the messaging, whether you're at as far as I'm aware, and I'll look into this offline too, but talking to your council members when you see them in the community, going to neighborhood coffee and associations, neighborhood associations, and bringing up the interest of museums, because when it comes to the budget discussions, when that budget comes in front of them, and if they say to them, like, we would like to see more funding in the museums, or if there's a comment during that hearing regarding that we would need more to support it, then there's an action item that can be made.
We're talking about two different things. As an individual, I can go and talk to a councilman, but what we're saying is we want the council to know that our whole commission feels this way as a commission, not, and as an
I
individual.
get that, yeah.
I'd like to offer that we probably should discuss this so we know what we're talking about and we know what we're not doing that we used to do. My concern is that there are artifacts that are not being taken care of. As you described, there's some restoration work needed on at least the building on Cannery Row. I imagine there are other things that we used to do that we can't do now because we have gone through the drawdown, then COVID, and now we're coming out of that. And if someone does not remind the city of what they're not doing anymore, I don't think anybody else is going to say anything, because the people who do the budget, they've got a job to do. They've got this much money. We're going to put it where we want to put it until you find out you're letting something go that you really should be doing. So it may come that we have our discussion and we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. Then that's good.
So, John, are you proposing we should have a separate discussion about all that?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, I would propose that we discuss this and we have some facts, and then we can make an
Yeah.
intelligent decision that we can support.
yeah, I think that's good. I think we should do that as well. I think it's a good plan. So when will we do that discussion?
It'll have to be agendized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So should we make a motion, put them in the next agenda?
Don't? Okay. Thank you.
All right, we don't. Okay. Anybody else, any other questions, comments? Anybody out there in public? Yeah. Then we have commissioner comments. John, do you have anything?
Well, a lot of work has been done, Brian. I'm impressed, really. And it's nice to see them on your left, that I used to look at all the time before. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Well, there's a celebration in Colton Hall tomorrow. I don't know what time it's happening, but it is the 175th anniversary of Colton Hall. And they're going to have cookies, and I don't know what else, but
Just some small activities. We don't have a big group or huge presentation this year. There are two tours, so we're doing, I think, what, 12:30 and 2:30? 12:30 and 2:30, we'll have two tours inside the building and some cookies and some activities for kids if they come in.
this is another activity where we need more horsepower or people power. But it's nice to see Dennis's shining face.
How did you know about that Colton Hall? Again, I feel that as was pointed out, lots is being done, but we're not called upon to help out. We are willing to come help out. And as a group, we need to make the statement that we are understaffed. Other groups may not be, have been reduced. The enormous percentage we have.
For groups that I
We might stop.
tell everyone else, but I'm very happy about the path of history moving forward. I look forward to it being available to the public. I work for a tour company periodically. And people want to see that and want to know that, but they don't know it's there right now. And they've had a lot of trouble with things not working. Thank you, Brian, for doing all that work. That's really good, really good.
The only thing I would have to add is, I already mentioned the weekly coming out today. There's a nice photo of Brian and the Western Flyer model. That's all I have.
All right, I guess that's everything, so. Meeting adjourned.